They thought I was just a sweet old woman who'd sign whatever paper they put in front of me. They thought 74 meant feeble. They thought grief had made me stupid. So when I quietly moved every asset I owned out of their reach, my own son stood in my kitchen and called me a thief to my face, in the house where I raised him. What he didn't know was that I had already been 3 steps ahead of him for 6 months. And by the time I was done, he wouldn't just lose the inheritance he thought he was owed. He would lose the one thing he never expected to lose at all. Before I tell you how it happened, I want to say hello to every single one of you watching. If you're the kind of person who believes that respect isn't owed just because of blood, hit that like button right now. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one because I have plenty. And type in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I read every single one. And it means more to me than you know to see this little corner of the internet stretch out across the whole world. Now pour yourself something warm, sit back, and let me tell you what happened to me. My name is Jennifer. I'm 74 years old, and for 41 years I ran a small chain of bakeries with my husband, Walter. We started with one shop, flour on our hands and barely enough money to keep the lights on, and we built it into something that fed 3 towns for 4 decades. Walter passed 2 years ago. Cancer. Quiet and cruel, the way it takes people you love slowly enough that you think you have more time and then one day you don't. I have 2 children. My son, who I will call by his role in this story rather than his name because some names don't deserve to be spoken with kindness anymore, and my daughter, who I will simply call my girl because despite everything, she is still that to me. After Walter died, I was the only name left on the deeds, the accounts, the business. 41 years of work sat in my hands alone. And I want you to understand something about grief. It doesn't just take the person you loved. It opens a door. And through that door walk people you didn't know were waiting. My son started visiting more. First I thought it was kindness. He'd bring his wife, sit at my table, ask how I was sleeping, whether I was eating enough. I was so hungry for company that I mistook attention for love. It took me longer than I'm proud of to notice the pattern. Every visit somehow circled back to the business. How much was it worth now? Had I thought about simplifying my finances? Had I considered putting his name on the accounts just in case something happened to me? Just in case something happened to me. As if I hadn't just watched something happen to my husband of 43 years and survived it standing upright. I want to pause here and ask you something because I think about this a lot. When did we decide that grieving parents are supposed to become invisible? That the moment you bury your partner, your children are entitled to start dividing up what's left of you like you're already gone too? I raised my son better than that. Or so I believed. The first real crack came about 4 months after Walter's funeral. My son asked me very casually over pot roast whether I'd thought about getting my affairs in order. I said I had a will, that Walter and I had done that together years ago. Everything split evenly between him and his sister. He got quiet. Then he said something I will never forget. He said, "Don't you think it makes more sense for the business to go to the one who actually understands it?" He had never worked a single day in that bakery. Not one shift. Not one delivery run. Not one 4 a.m. flour delivery in the freezing cold. My daughter had. She'd worked summers there through high school and college. She knew every recipe, every supplier, every regular customer by name. But my son had a business degree and an opinion, and apparently in his mind, that outweighed 40 years of actual labor. I didn't argue with him that night. I've learned that the smartest thing a woman my age can do is smile, nod, and go quiet. Not because I agree, but because I'm thinking. And I was thinking very hard. Over the following weeks, I started noticing small things. A folder of financial documents in my study that I hadn't left out. A missed call from my bank asking me to confirm a recent authorization request that I had never made. My son just stopping by when I wasn't home. And my daughter-in-law mentioning, a little too casually, that she'd been in the study looking for a stapler. I am 74, not senile. I raised 2 children, buried a husband, and ran a business through 2 recessions. I know when something is being taken from me, even when the hands doing the taking are gentle and smiling. So I made some calls. Quietly. I found a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Patricia, who had helped a widowed friend of mine 2 years earlier. I sat in her office and told her everything, the visits, the comments, the folder that moved, the bank call. She looked at me over her glasses and said, "Jennifer, I think you already know what's happening here." I did. I just needed someone else to say it out loud so I could stop pretending I'd imagined it. Patricia and I spent the next several months doing something my son never saw coming. We restructured everything. The bakeries, the property, the accounts, all of it moved into a trust with ironclad protections. Not to disinherit anyone unfairly, but to make absolutely certain that nothing could be quietly transferred, co-signed, or simplified out from under me while I was alive to still have opinions about my own life's work. I updated the will properly, with witnesses, with video documentation of me stating clearly and calmly that I was of sound mind and acting entirely of my own free will. I wanted no ambiguity, no room for anyone to later claim I'd been confused, coerced, or taken advantage of. And here is the part that still makes something in my chest tighten when I think about it. I made my daughter, the one who had actually earned it, the trustee. Not because I love her more. I love them equally, painfully, the way every mother does even when one child breaks her heart. But because she was the one who showed up with flour on her hands instead of forms in hers. I didn't tell either of them what I'd done. I wanted to see what would happen next, and I hate to admit that part of me, a part I'm not proud of, but a part that's honest, wanted to see how far my son would go if he thought the door was still open. It didn't take long. 2 months later, he came to me with paperwork already printed. A power of attorney document, he called it, dressed up in language about protecting me from unnecessary stress and administrative burden as I got older. He'd had it drawn up already. All it needed was my signature. He sat across from me at my own kitchen table, the one Walter and I bought secondhand 30 years ago and refinished together on a Sunday afternoon, and he slid that folder toward me like he was doing me a favor. I asked him to explain it to me. He simplified it in that tone people use with children and the elderly, like I hadn't run payroll for 11 employees for 4 decades. He told me it would just make things easier if I signed everything over to him to manage. I asked him one question. I asked him what would happen to the business and to me if I refused. He didn't expect the question. I watched something shift behind his eyes, something that had been sitting there for months finally showing itself. He said, and I remember every word of this, "Mom, be realistic. You're not going to be able to run this forever. I'm just trying to make sure it doesn't fall apart when you can't anymore. When you can't anymore. Not if. When." I told him I appreciated his concern, and that I'd already taken care of my affairs. I told him everything was protected, that the business, the property, everything was secured in a trust, with my daughter as trustee, and that no signature of mine could undo what was already legally locked in place. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard in that kitchen. He called me a thief. In my own house. He said I had stolen his inheritance, stolen his future, that I had turned his sister against him, as though she had ever needed my help to see what I had already seen. He raised his voice in a way he had never once raised it to me as a child, not even as a teenager during the years when teenagers are supposed to test you. I sat there and let him finish because I wanted to hear all of it. I wanted to know exactly who my son had become. When he was done, I told him something I had been holding on to for months, waiting for the right moment to say it plainly. I told him that inheritance is not owed. It is earned or it is given freely, but it is never, ever owed. I told him that his father and I built that business with our hands and our backs and our sleepless nights, and that no one, not even our own blood, gets to demand a piece of it as though it were a debt we owed simply for having children. He left that day and didn't speak to me for months. I won't pretend that didn't hurt. It hurt more than almost anything else in my life, and I have buried a husband, so that tells you something. There were nights I sat alone in that kitchen and cried until I couldn't breathe, wondering if I had done the wrong thing, wondering if protecting myself meant losing my son entirely. Grief doesn't disappear just because you were strong enough to protect yourself from being taken advantage of. Sometimes being strong just means you grieve 2 things at once. But here is what I want you to understand, and this is the part of the story I think matters most. My daughter, the one who had every reason to feel entitled after being so clearly the one who deserved that trust, never once acted like she'd won something. She showed up. She kept working. She sat with me on the nights I cried and never once said I told you so, even though she absolutely could have. She didn't need the title of trustee to prove her worth to me. She had already proven it every single day for 20 years. About 8 months after that day in the kitchen, my son reached out. Not with an apology at first, with a request, still asking whether things could be reconsidered. I told him no. Not out of spite, but because I had learned something about myself in those 8 months. I had learned that protecting my legacy wasn't really about the money or the business at all. It was about protecting the last years of my life from being spent defending myself against my own child. It took almost a full year before he came to me with something that felt real. No paperwork. No requests. Just him standing at my door, asking if he could sit down. He apologized. Not perfectly, grown men rarely apologize perfectly the first time I found, but honestly, in a way that made me believe he had actually sat with what he'd done rather than simply regretting getting caught. He told me he had let fear turn into greed, that watching his father die had frightened him into thinking he needed to control something, anything, and that he had chosen the worst possible way to try to feel safe. I didn't hand him back a piece of the trust. I want to be honest with you about that, because I know some of you watching want a tidy ending where everyone gets an equal slice and hugs it out over dinner. That is not what happened, and I don't think it should have. What I gave him instead was something I think mattered more in the long run. I gave him a chance to be my son again, without conditions attached to money. He started visiting not because there was something to gain, but simply because he missed his mother. And slowly, carefully, I let myself believe that. My daughter still runs the bakeries today. They've grown even further than they were when Walter was alive, and I like to think he'd be proud of what she's built on the foundation we laid. My son works in his own field entirely, has never asked about the business again, and has, for the first time in his adult life, simply been present for the sake of being present. I share this story not because I want anyone to hate my son. People are shaped by fear more often than by malice, and fear can make good people do things that look, from the outside, indistinguishable from cruelty. I share it because I think there are so many women my age sitting in kitchens right now, being handed folders across their own tables, being told it would just be easier to sign something over. I want every one of you to know that you are allowed to protect what you built, even from the people you love most. Especially from them sometimes. Legacy isn't just money. It's the respect you demand for the life you've lived and the work you've done. Don't let anyone, blood or otherwise, convince you that loving them means disappearing quietly. If this story meant something to you, stay with me. I have so many more to tell. Like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from tonight. I promise you every single comment finds its way to me. And knowing you're out there listening means this old woman is never really sitting in that kitchen alone. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next one.